So I am super excited to chat with today's guest, who I've been following for quite a long time. We have Jeffrey Smith, and we're going to be talking about GMOs and glyphosate. And before this conversation, I was sharing an article from 2013 that I wrote that when I was telling Jeffrey that he was the one that motivated me to write the article on GMOs and how potentially it could affect thyroid health. And yeah, so again, I'm absolutely thrilled to chat with Jeffrey, and I'm going to dive into his bio here. And so, as a global thought leader on the health dangers of genetically modified organisms for over 27 years, Jeffrey Smith has authored 2 bestsellers, directed 5 documentaries, delivered 2,000 lectures and interviews in 45 countries, trained 1,500 speakers, and organized more than 10,000 grassroots advocates. Jeffrey has counseled world leaders in 6 continents, and his meticulous research presented at medical conferences inspired thousands to prescribe non-GMO and organic diets. And the success of the GMO education movement he pioneered is measured in part by the 48% of world consumers who acknowledge GMOs are unhealthy. So Jeffrey and IRT are now sounding the alarm about new genetic engineering techniques such as gene editing. Unregulated GMO 2.0 can cause health and environmental disasters, and the most urgent danger comes from genetically engineered microbes. Jeffrey is stewarding a global effort to prevent their release. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. It was so fun seeing a 2013 article by you because we haven't spoken, and I discover I've been doing this for 27 years on the global scale for 20 years, and people come up to me and say, "Oh yeah, I was in a conference 2 days ago," and someone said, "Yeah, you came around 2004 to Navy Pier in Chicago, and we bought 100 CDs after you then passed them out to everyone, and someone else changed their diet and was growing their own food." It's like planting non-GMO and organic seeds around the world and then not even knowing what's happening until some chance meeting like this. So now we have a lot more evidence linking GMOs and Roundup to thyroid conditions, which I'm sure your audience will want to know. But I am excited and thrilled to meet you because evidently the relationship has been one way and now it gets to be two-way.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I don't realize until you sent me your bio that you've been doing it that long. Again, 2013, as of recording this, over 10 years ago, it was February 2013. But again, you've been doing this for 27 years, which is just amazing.
It is. And I'm celebrating our 20th anniversary since Seeds of Deception came out, 20th anniversary since I founded the Institute for Responsible Technology at responsibletechnology.org. And I'm looking over, we're about to do a big celebration of the 20 years. So I'm looking back at the kind of influence, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And this is an example of something that I get to add to. I get to celebrate you now, Eric.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Jeffrey. And I guess if we could just start off by talking about what GMOs are, just for those maybe small percentage of people who don't know what GMOs are, but if you could not only talk about GMOs, but what's meant by GMO 2.0. So I don't know if you want to make that leap right away into
Sure.
GMO
I do want to
2.0.
say that I'm going to be showing some jaw-dropping charts in just a few minutes, linking GMOs and the Roundup sprayed on most GMOs with about 40 different diseases. Not just linking them, but showing that as the use of GMOs and Roundup increased, these diseases skyrocketed in parallel. So it's not just another health issue to worry about. It may be one of the most serious and impactful environmental insults which lead the way to all sorts of diseases. And we understand in many cases why. We know the modes of action. We have the animal feeding studies. We have all these different things. So I wanted to make sure I said that up front, because if people know GMOs and they go, okay, yeah, I know GMOs and I try and avoid them, they may not know that Roundup is sprayed on wheat and oats and lentils and mung beans and whatnot. And we'll get into that too. So it's not just avoiding GMOs that we'll be getting into, but how to protect yourself from both GMOs and Roundup. So genetically modified organisms, GMOs, were originally brought to market for food by Monsanto. And the reason was that their glyphosate-based herbicide, Roundup, the glyphosate was going off patent in 2000. So glyphosate kills bacteria. It's a big antibiotic. But they found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump near their factory that wasn't dying in the presence of glyphosate. So they figured, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene from the bacterium that allowed it to survive and inserted it into soybeans and corn and canola and cotton. And now Roundup ready crops were created so you can spray the field after the crops had already started growing with Roundup herbicide and not kill those crops, just all of the other plant biodiversity. So it was a method to make weeding easier for farmers. Now, with glyphosate mixed with the other ingredients like their surfactant POEA in Roundup, it's designed to break into the cell walls of the plant and get inside the plant where it migrates to the food portion. About 15% leaves the roots, but the rest is still in there. So we actually end up eating the soy and the corn, cottonseed oil, canola oil that are from seeds and plants that have Roundup in them because of the Roundup ready crops. Now, the Roundup is dangerous in ways that are very well understood, and more is coming each day. There was research last week and the week before showing serious issues, children cognitive disorders, kidney problems, and we'll talk about some of them. And the GMOs have been shown to have all sorts of health dangers in virtually every organ and every system studied. And now you have a combination of those two. But it gets worse because the corn in the United States, most of it also produces a pesticide, an insecticide to kill insects. They took a gene from soil bacterium, which normally kills insects, but then it washes away or biodegrades. But now it's encapsulated in the corn that we eat, and in high concentrations in laboratory settings, it pokes holes in human cells, and it causes allergic reactions in humans. So now we have three toxic conditions in GMOs. The GMO itself, which has massive collateral damage due to the insertion of foreign genes. We have the Roundup and the other glyphosate-based herbicides, and we have the Bt toxin insecticide. And we have tracked these and the modes of action in the animal feeding studies to a long list of diseases. And the good news is, as we'll see in one of the slides, people have reported getting better from at least 28 different conditions when they switch to organic food, which does not allow either GMOs or Roundup.
And it's not about just eating these GMO foods directly, but for example, if you were to eat meat, like if you were to eat whether it's poultry or grain-fed beef, for example, I mean, I imagine that also could have an impact too, an indirect impact.
Gerald Guest, who is the head of the Division of Veterinary Medicine of the FDA, wrote a memo saying that there are unique risks associated with eating the meat and milk from animals that have been fed GMOs. And he, like all of the other scientists at the FDA, were ignored. In fact, their concerns about the health dangers of GMOs, which were revealed in memo after memo that became public from a lawsuit in 1998, showed that they wanted not only animal feeding studies, but human toxicological studies to prove that GMOs were safe. But the person in charge of policy at the FDA, Michael Taylor, was Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president, and said, we know of no difference between GMOs and non-GMOs, therefore no testing or labeling is necessary. That was fraud. That was a lie, but we didn't know it at the time that the policy was created in 1992, which was a look the other way policy, which is still in place. But it turns out what Gerald Guest said makes sense, because if an animal is eating grain with Roundup crops, Roundup ready crops, there could be something called bioaccumulation. where the Roundup gets stored in the animal. And we know now from radio labeled assays that a lot of it can stay for a couple of weeks and concentrate in the bones and in certain organs. Most of it goes out through urine, but some do concentrate. And in addition, it's been found in milk, mother's milk, so we can assume it's in the cow's milk as well. And also the impact can change the structure and health of the animal. The GMOs and the Roundup can both do that. And we've seen massive problems with the health of animals that are fed GMOs. And these are serious conditions in pigs with ulcers in the stomach and changes in the microbiome of animals that have caused serious problems. Veterinarians and pet owners tell us that when they switch their animals to organic, older dogs become like puppies again and serious chronic issues go away. In fact, I spoke to Dr. Michael Fox, who wrote the column for 25 to 30 million readers, Animal Doctor. And when GMOs were introduced, all of these pet owners sent him letters saying now there's intractable diarrhea and itching and whatnot. He said, get your pet off of GMOs. And sure enough, things got better. Same thing with the pediatricians dealing with the children. All of a sudden, these complicated diseases came up. And when they put the family on organic, things got better. So we have that level of evidence, and it goes much deeper. And we know that Roundup binds with minerals, making them unavailable. So the minerals are still there, but they're like hugged by the glyphosate molecule, and they can't be used by the human or animal or plant. So most of the livestock that we eat or get eggs or milk from, most of them have as the majority of their diet Roundup ready crops. So they not only have the poison aspect, but they end up minerally deficient. And that may explain some of the serious diseases, the chronic and widespread diseases, including the infertility in many of the livestock in the United States and around the world, as well as chronic botulism and other things. And we now understand the modes of action for that as well. So yes, now anecdotal evidence is just that, but it's compelling if it's yourself or your friend or your family. I know a farmer told me about a good friend of his. They had their own chickens and they were eating the eggs of the chicken every single day. And all of a sudden, one morning after eating the eggs, the mother and the daughter were rushed to the hospital having anaphylactic allergenic shock. And the father, called the feed supplier and said, was there any change? He said, yeah, I couldn't get the non-GMO anymore, so I gave you the GMO. And so the family didn't even know it, but eating it, the day that they ate it, there was a change. And I know other people that cannot eat animal products from animals that are fed GMOs. So even though it's one off here and one off there, it makes a difference if you're that one off.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. So yeah, definitely want to not just eat organic produce, but any animal-based foods, whether it's eggs, dairy, again, meat, poultry, and yeah, and your pets too. So yeah, don't. That's also a good point too, because some people tend to just focus on eating organic food, but how about the pets who are eating the canned food or whatever type of food that has GMOs? So again, appreciate you mentioning that. And then you mentioned the minerals, and we chatted a little bit prior to recording this, pressing record, with thyroid and selenium, and so really, is it all the minerals? Because with thyroid, it's not just selenium, of course, is very important when it comes to thyroid and thyroid immunity, but then iodine. There's a lot of controversy with iodine and thyroid health, but can glyphosate pretty much bind all these minerals, or does it have an affinity for certain minerals?
The correlation or the coefficient of chelation coefficient is higher for certain minerals than others. Manganese, very high. Selenium, high. Cobalt, very high. Vitamin E. So you end up with a situation where a lot of the trace minerals, which are in small amounts, are unavailable. And we know that thyroid health is intimately connected with selenium, and you mentioned magnesium. Um, and if the selenium that we're getting in small amounts anyway is bound up with glyphosate, then we may end up with a deficiency, and that's linked to more severe diseases. Now, from a layperson's view, it's like all of the workers are there ready to work, but the foreman hasn't showed up. The foreman is the mineral. Some call it the key in the ignition. Without that, all these metabolic pathways that help the body are sit idle and do not function. So when you end up with mineral deficiency, there's a long list of diseases that can result from that. So thyroid conditions are just one of them. Shall we look at some of the diseases related to GMOs and Roundup that we found from an epidemiological basis?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to share some slides. And as you'll see on the screen now, it's coming up. This is inflammatory bowel disease in the US from 1990 to about 2011. And the orange line is the amount of glyphosate-based herbicides, or the amount of glyphosate sprayed on soy and corn. Now remember, soy and corn became Roundup ready, and now it's over 90% of both. It was introduced in 1996, which is that big leap up of the amount of glyphosate sprayed on soy and corn. And Americans eat more than their weight in GMOs each year, and a lot of it is the corn and the soy. Now, as the glyphosate increased, inflammatory bowel disease went up. Now, this is correlation, and it doesn't prove causation, but we have a lot of evidence to suggest that this is a causal relationship. In fact, at 150 lectures, I asked audiences, what have you noticed you got better from when you switched to non-GMO and organic diet? And the number one most common reported benefit was digestive disorders. And we surveyed 3,256 people who reported getting better from 28 conditions. The number one most reported was digestive disorders, 85.2%. Now, in a peer-reviewed published article that I wrote in the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, not only did I present the evidence of these survey that we did, but I went into all the potential reasons why GMOs, Roundup, and Bt toxin might cause digestive disorders, leaky gut, problems with the microbiome, suppressed digestive enzymes, damage to the microvilli, all of these that could lead to that, plus the animal feeding studies showing that it actually does. Now, but I'm only going to present the slides showing the correlation, and you should know that we have evidence that suggests, or in some cases pretty much nailed down, causation. And I'm going to go through these 38 or 40 slides very quickly in about a minute and a half. So I will read the name of the disease, and those who are watching can see the dramatically tight correlation between the slope either of the Roundup, or in some cases, the Roundup is one line, the percentage of GMO soy and corn is another line. Sometimes there's a trend showing that if there hadn't been a new environmental insult, then it would have been way less. So here we have deaths from obesity. So we just went from inflammatory bowel to deaths from obesity. Those that can't see, I'll just name them. And here goes anxiety, diabetes, deaths from Alzheimer's, deaths from Parkinson's, deaths from hypertension, autism in 6-year-olds, insomnia, celiac disease, acute kidney injury, death from kidney failure, kidney and renal pelvic cancer, liver cancer, liver and bile duct cancer. Here's thyroid cancer, which I'll leave on for just a moment. The pre-1990 trend for the age-adjusted thyroid cancer was flat, but it goes up rather dramatically when GMOs are introduced, with a R value, which means a correlation value of 0.9377. A 1 is a perfect correlation. And the World Health Organization linked Roundup or glyphosate with cancer, calling it a probable human carcinogen. Here's deaths to acute myeloid leukemia, breast cancer, deaths from intestinal infection, deaths from disorders of lipoprotein metabolism, peritonitis, hepatitis C, dementia, deaths from senile dementia, ADHD, schizophrenia, suicide by overdose, birth defects, congenital heart defects, newborn metabolic disorders, newborn genitourinary disorders, skin disorders, newborns with lung conditions, newborn eye disorders, newborn blood disorders that are related to the immune system, anemia, lymph disorders, age-adjusted deaths due to stroke. Now, here's 28 conditions that people got better from when they switched to non-GMO. Digestive problems were at the top, 85%. Fatigue, 60%. Overweight or obesity, 55%. Brain fog, 52%. Anxiety and depression, 52%. Food allergies and sensitivities, 50%. Then you have memory, concentration, joint pain, seasonal allergies, gluten sensitivity, all the way down to the lowest, which is Parkinson's disease. So these are examples of two different sets of data. One is self-reports, and some of these are reports from physicians about their patients. Then there's epidemiological evidence, and we're not going to bring up the trove of animal feeding studies. But I will mention sometimes we have modes of action that are so logical that it's just hard not to mention. So insomnia. How can insomnia be related to GMOs and Roundup? Well, everyone knows melatonin is something you take if you can't sleep. It's a neurotransmitter that governs the daily rhythms, and that is converted from serotonin. Serotonin is produced largely in the gut, and its precursor is L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan is produced in the gut by the gut bacteria by something called the shikimate pathway. The shikimate pathway is disabled by glyphosate. Now we go the other way. We don't have a shikimate pathway. We don't have L-tryptophan. We have a deficiency of serotonin, which has its own problems in terms of cognitive disorders, anxiety, etc. And there's also less tyrosine, so the dopamine doesn't necessarily get made, so the happy chemicals aren't there. But then the serotonin can't be converted to melatonin, and now we have insomnia. And 1/3 of the people who switched to non-GMO and largely organic diets said that their sleep got better. Their insomnia conditions got better when they switched to organic. So we have personal reports, clinical evidence, modes of action, and epidemiological evidence. So it's pretty strong. And we understand so many modes of action. I'm going to just leave it there, Eric, because I think people get that this is absolutely fundamental to healthy life, and that is to eat organic. And when you eat organic, create a spreadsheet every day, all the symptoms 1 to 10, your energy level, your mood, percentage of organic, and watch what changes. Could be your acne, could be your weight, could be your mood, could be who knows what. And that's the question. We don't know which is related, but track them all and see. Then you will be more committed to an organic diet if you've seen the change. And if you decide to go back, you can change that too. And you can monitor that too and see if your symptoms return.
I'm so glad that you pinpointed insomnia because you covered all these scary conditions, and some might overlook insomnia, but so many people experience sleep disorders and yet don't make that connection. And I'll admit I'm guilty of that too. I would, even though I tell people to eat organic and encourage them, it's not because of the sleep issues that they could potentially have, but it's, again, obviously there's a lot of other health conditions as you revealed. But yeah, that's amazing that just changing one's diet from conventional to organic I think you said like a third of people experience an improvement in sleep, which is quite amazing. And also want to bring up for those listening with Graves and Hashimoto's, which a lot of people have those conditions who are listening to this. That was on the chart too, like not specifically those conditions, but autoimmunity, and that makes sense with glyphosate's impact on the gut microbiome, and most of the immune system cells are in the gut. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing
I
that.
can talk a little bit about autoimmunity because I think there's some interesting information. First of all, Roundup Ready soy, when cooked, does not denature trypsin inhibitor, hardly at all, according to Monsanto's own study that was attempted to be hidden. But the amount of trypsin inhibitor was as much as 7 times that of natural soy after it was cooked. Now, trypsin inhibitor in large amounts is extremely dangerous. It blocks the ability of trypsin to break down proteins. When you have proteins lasting longer in the digestive tract, they're more likely to create an immune response, an allergic response. Resistant proteins are one of the characteristics of an allergen. Now, at the same time, you have Roundup sprayed on the soy. Roundup, you can look actually at cells in a microscope where you put glyphosate in there and it splits apart the tight junction. So now you have intercellular leaky gut created by Roundup. It also can affect the zonulin, which is a biochemical pathway related to it. But even without the zonulin, it can do that. It also affects the microbiome. And the microbiome, it damages that, which helps keep the mucosal barrier and helps keep the intact. So many ways that Roundup might be causing this intercellular between the cells opening up in the tight junctions. Then you eat corn that has Bt toxin, which might poke holes inside the cell. That's how it kills insects. So now you may have intracellular leaky gut. That's 2 different types of leaky gut. So now you have leaky gut, and you have these proteins that don't have the access to as much breakdown because your trypsin isn't working as well. But glyphosate doesn't stop there. That was the GMO soy. Glyphosate, in studies on carnivorous fish, suppressed the production of enzymes to break down foods, all the digestive enzyme classes. Also, the microvilli, which absorb, that's damaged both by glyphosate and by Bt toxin. So now you have these holes in the gut. You have undigested proteins, which then can potentially make their way into the bloodstream. And then the immune system considers it an attack, and they all gather around and start attacking it, and they get out their iPhones and they take pictures of it, post it on the body's Facebook and say anything that looks like this you should attack, but it's pixelated, so the rest of the immune system goes, okay, we'll attack anything that looks like it, and the thyroid looks like it, so they attack the thyroid, and the pancreas looks like it, so they attack the pancreas. So that's basically how autoimmune disease is. It's leaky gut and faulty iPhones. So that's an example of how it's kind of a gang up just in that gut. On top of that, there is a triggering of the immune system because the Bt toxin can create an immune response. So now there's a heightened immune response, a systemic immune response, a mucosal immune response, and that heightens the reactivity of the immune system at the same time. So we can track not only autoimmune disease to this package of GMOs, Roundup, and Bt toxin, but also gluten sensitivity. In fact, I think I was the first person 11 years ago to raise the relationship. It's since been the subject of peer-reviewed articles and a lot of clinical evidence. In fact, in our individual reports, gluten sensitivity reduced by 42.2% in the 3,256 people who we surveyed. And a lot of people say that, sometimes people are gluten sensitive and they switch to corn. Wrong. If the corn is not organic, or it's not non-GMO, it might be actually exacerbating the situation.
Wow. Yeah. That's yeah. Just I've been, and again, you brought up years ago, and just some people, when they have what they think might be a gluten sensitivity, yeah, it actually might be the glyphosate. It could be obviously a combination of two. But thank you for sharing that as well. How about for those who are listening or watching and they're wondering, well, like organic, yeah, like I'll try to eat organic, but is just choosing foods that are non-GMO enough, like ones that have the label non-GMO but are not organic. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Not good enough. Here's the reason. So I'm not an expert at all the food toxins. I'm not a nutritionist, but I follow two or three. I follow Roundup and glyphosate-based herbicides, and I follow GMOs, and I understand how dangerous. Now, Roundup is seriously dangerous. It can damage the foundation of our health. For the geeks among us, I'm just going to list the things that glyphosate does on a foundational level, not a disease level. You've already seen some. It blocks the ability for certain minerals to be used. It can damage the microbiome, can cause leaky gut. It can cause cancer, also birth defects. It can damage the mitochondria. It can damage the ability to produce neurotransmitters. It can mess up the hormones. It can damage digestive capacity. And I'm just getting started. So you don't want Roundup in your food. But glyphosate-based herbicides like Roundup are sprayed on the grains and the beans. So it's on the wheat, it's on the oats in particular, it's on the mung beans and the lentils and the chickpeas. So hummus is out. All these things, unless it's organic, can contain high levels of glyphosate residues. So if you can't get organic, then eat non-GMO and avoid those specific foods whenever you can that have high levels of glyphosate residues. In the website responsibletechnology.org, we have a database of all the different tests that we can find by organizations, including our own, that test for glyphosate residues. And you can see which ones have high levels. And you can see how organic, in almost every case, has either very low levels by comparison or no detectable levels. Why would it have any detectable levels? Well, sometimes there's accidental contamination, but also glyphosate is used so much. It's the most used agricultural chemical in history, 300 million pounds a year. It's in the air now. It's in the rain. So even trying to grow organic in certain parts of the country may end up with glyphosate contamination at low levels. So we can't eliminate it completely, but we can certainly reduce it.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So yeah, or the problem with non-GMO essentially is that does not mean that it's non-glyphosate, that it's glyphosate free. So you're avoiding the
Exactly.
genetically modified organisms, not the glyphosate. And how about water? So what water would you recommend, or what, if I may ask, what water do you drink? Because I imagine you're trying to avoid the glyphosate in the water as
Yeah,
well.
I have a purifier that adds hydrogen to it, and we did a couple of webinars about it because I was impressed on its impact on the microbiome. But I didn't do any webinars until I got the certificate that it had no detectable levels of glyphosate. So in the lab, they added glyphosate at a certain level, and then they put it through the filter, and then they tested the water afterwards. There's a few like that. So if you have a water filter, RO is supposed to do that, reverse osmosis. But I just talked to someone 2 days ago, and they said their RO is not doing it. So
Mm.
they may have a faulty RO. So you can send your own water for a test, about 225 or 250 bucks last time I checked. You can also test your own urine for about 100 bucks, or your hair on glyphosate levels. Hair gives it over time. Urine is more of a spot check, because if you change your diet the night before, it can spike. If you cut out glyphosate for a week, it'll go down dramatically because most of it goes out in the urine.
Yeah, I did a urinary glyphosate test a number of years ago, and definitely had. So I don't think I've seen one that doesn't have any glyphosate, but it was within the acceptable limits, but still tried to do things to decrease it, and then including sauna, which I don't know if there's actual research, but when I did a retest, it showed that it was lower. So between trying to, I mean, I was already really eating organic and doing but the sauna I was a little bit more aggressive with, and that whether or not
Yeah.
it's coincidental or not, it did seem to help.
I did a whole program called Healing from GMOs and Roundup, where I interviewed 18 experts. And I think it was Lee Cowden and Dietrich Klinghardt who both said detoxification using a sauna would be helpful for the process of getting rid of glyphosate. It was interesting. Dietrich said something that I hadn't heard until that point, but I had heard since. He is most seriously damaged or unhealthy patients, like the autistic kids, had no glyphosate detectable in their urine until he started the glyphosate detoxification protocols. And then the glyphosate started coming out. It was as if they could not detoxify, and it was being held in their system and wreaking havoc. And I've heard that at least one other time by another practitioner that does regular urine testing for glyphosate.
Interesting. So if someone does a test and if it looks great, it just might be that it's stored in the tissues, and so it might be worth doing it again. I mean, detox. I
Yeah,
mean,
doing a
we live in
detox.
a yeah, because we live in a toxic world regardless. So just, I mean, we're obviously doing things naturally to detox, but I think in this day and age, again, we need to do more than just trying to detox through diet. So yeah, that's very interesting. And do you know I mean, you probably know exactly, but I won't put you on. Well, as far as the number of foods that are genetically modified, do you know the current
Oh, yeah,
number?
sure. So we've held it down to a dozen for many years, but and I'm going to transition to GMO 2.0 here because this is the issue. Soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, and alfalfa. Those are the six main GMOs with the largest acreage. Alfalfa, not just for alfalfa sprouts, but mostly for hay for dairy cows. And canola and cottonseed oil. The sugar beets are not the table beets, they're for sugar. But then we also have zucchini and yellow squash. We have papaya from Hawaii or China. We have apples that don't turn brown when sliced, so don't buy the pre-sliced apples from Amazon. And we have potatoes that don't turn brown when sliced, and they're throughout the food supply now, so that's a big problem. And then there's the recent addition of a pink pineapple, which is weird. But now we also have a group that's introduced genetically engineered salmon into Canada, and then I think it stopped for a while, and they're going to reintroduce it into the United States through catering and restaurants, so they don't have to label it. And there's in the South America, there's now a Roundup. There's a herbicide tolerant wheat. In Bangladesh and India, there's an eggplant, and they're trying to get some other things approved. So those are the only GMO commercial crops that we know about, except the new gene edited GMOs. Gene editing is a newer way of creating GMOs. Instead of taking a gene from one species and putting it in using a gene gun or bacterial smuggling, you can cut the genome at specific places. And then when it reattaches, you can have it build something or actually take in a foreign gene or just cut out and knock out a gene so it doesn't produce a protein. Now, the way they describe it and the way that I just did sounds very precise. In reality, it's an absolute massive collateral damage show. In fact, the journal Nature described it as chromosomal mayhem. Deletions, additions, scrambling, chromosomes moved onto different chromosome sections. You can watch a 6-minute animated film at responsibletechnology.org called 7 Reasons Why Gene Editing is Dangerous and Unpredictable. There's the possibility of new DNA from bacteria or other animals being put in there. There's the possibility of proteins being truncated, causing allergens or toxins. There's epigenetic effects that can be inherited for at least 10 generations. It's absolutely a disaster when applied to food. So you would think that the regulatory agencies would say, no, you can't put any gene edited food onto the market unless it's thoroughly tested. And they don't. They have been tricked by the biotech industry. We've created an echo chamber of scientists saying, oh, it's safe, it's natural, it's precise, using the same adjectives they tried to describe GMO 1.0 years ago, and finally people realized, no, it's not true. So they've gotten countries to deregulate, turn the other way on gene-edited products that don't have foreign genes put in, thinking that, oh, it's not a GMO. It is a GMO, and it's very dangerous. But in the United States, no labeling and no testing. Now in Canada, the UK, Japan, Australia, India, Brazil, Argentina. And there's a company that's bragging, Conscious Foods, creating mustard greens and other greens, saying we're gene editing our salad for delivery to you through catering organizations and restaurants, so they don't have to label it. And that's a disaster, because now virtually anyone can create a gene-edited food. A CRISPR lab, which in its most basic form, CRISPR is a form of gene editing, can cost less than $2,000. You need to do a little bit more if you're going to create a food, but it's being distributed in high schools. And so we're in a situation where stealth GMOs will flood our food supply, and you can't easily test for them unless they're registered and you know what to look for. So our entire food supply is about to be contaminated unless we do something to stop it. So the Institute for Responsible Technology, which has been pioneering evidence about the health dangers around the world, building up a global movement, we see the possibility of a reversal of all of our wins because of gene editing. And that's just in food. But Eric, the worst situation is there's a gene rush to create GMOs quickly to solve all sorts of problems, real or made up, by entrepreneurs and academics who are going after insects and fish and trees and grass and pets. So we're talking about GMOs that once you release, you cannot recall. And you don't know what the outcome is going to be years on. Like the 24 rabbits released in Australia in 1859 so that visitors felt more comfortable so they can hunt rabbits. By the 1920s, there was over 10 billion because rabbits multiply like rabbits. So we don't know what's going to happen when we introduce these GMOs from gene editing. We do know the most common result of gene editing and GMOs in general are surprise side effects. So we may end biological evolution as we know it in this generation, now that we have the capacity to redirect the streams of evolution intentionally or accidentally, even by high school students who are assigned to use CRISPR kits and labs in science class. The most serious, the most dangerous, the most urgent situation is also around the most common species that are genetically engineered, and that's microbes. On our website at responsibletechnology.org, you can watch a 16-minute film called Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle. And it's about the dangers of genetically engineered microorganisms, and it's way, way worse than you can imagine. In the early 90s, there was a genetically engineered microbe that was nearly released. If it had been released as scheduled, as you'll see by the interview of this former professor of Oregon State University, it may have theoretically ended terrestrial plant life. Another one could have theoretically altered weather patterns. And these are just two genetically engineered microbes that might have caused these cataclysms, simply doing what it was designed to do, but better than the engineers thought in more ecosystems. But when you release a genetically engineered microbe, microbes travel, microbes mutate, microbes swap genes with other microbes. Now, the microbes co-evolved with us so that we actually rely on each other And they're an intimate and intricate part of our health and of our ecosystem and of our soil. Algae produces most of the Earth's oxygen. Mycorrhizal fungi networks shuttle nutrients between trees, keeping forests healthy. Soil microbes support the health of plants and draw down carbon. Up to 80% of human diseases find their basis in dysbiosis or dysfunctional microbiomes. We've outsourced up to 90% of our metabolic and chemical functions to the microbes living inside us. We can get away with a measly 23,000 genes because we use the genetic information from the 3.5 million genes of the microbial communities living inside us. But we've co-evolved with that. Now you introduce a genetically engineered gene that didn't co-evolve with us. You release it from a science student or a university student or someone that's trying to fix the soil, and it ends up in our gut, and it changes the nature of nature in ways that we can't predict. And it swaps the gene with genes inside us. Like one microbiologist talked about, when you release microbes into the soil that are genetically engineered, you equip them with antimicrobials to kill other microbes to survive the competition. You equip them with antibiotic resistance. Now, what if the antimicrobial antibiotic resistance genetic cassette is eaten because it's on soil? You lick your hands, and now some pathogen picks those up, and now it can kill other microbes, and it doesn't die from antibiotics. And it can live long and prosper, and then that can get out and create new pandemics. And we can create these new pandemics just by distributing CRISPR kits to schools. So there is an urgency like never before. And Institute for Responsible Technology, we're taking the lead at building a new global movement. And we'd like to invite all your listeners to come to responsibletechnology.org, sign up for our newsletter. Please make a recurring donation, even $5. It's so much more expensive to create new national laws and international treaties than it has been for the 20 years in consumer education. And we're bringing movements of movements, healthcare practitioners. We have a program we're launching for them. We're bringing natural products companies and supplement companies in that industry, regenerative agriculture, which relies on microbes, the climate change movement, which relies now on drawing down carbon, using the soil microbes, being healthy and doing what they were designed to do. Ocean preservationists, environmentalists, even the spiritual and religious people that believe GMO means God move over, all of them coming together to focus our energies on massive education, popular culture, and then new laws and international treaties to lock down and protect the microbiome from this unprecedented threat from cheap, unregulated, irrecoverable, irreversible, accident-prone gene editing technology.
Wow. Well, yeah, very scary, but very important that that you mentioned this. And I actually watched that video, the 60-minute video. So yeah, definitely recommend to also visit responsibletechnology.org. Again, make that donation. We definitely want to prevent GMO 3.0 from developing. I mean, and obviously try to do what we can, right now with the, existing GMO 2.0. And one more quick question: as far as lab grown meat, is that also under the category of GMO 2.0? Is that something separate?
Some of it is and some of it isn't. You can clone things without it being genetically modified, but a lot of them use gene editing at the same time. So I'm not an expert at the cloning. I do know that when you create a GMO, you can clone in advance the cells before you insert the gene editing or regular GMO mechanism. And then once the cell is transformed with the GMO, you then clone it into a plant. And that causes massive collateral damage, hundreds or thousands of mutations from that process alone. So even if you happen to get lucky and your gene editing happens to not cut in all the wrong places and create deletions and create additions and any mutations that it'll inevitably do, don't turn out to be mission critical, just growing the plant for food can cause serious problems that may end up in the food we're eating. So I also am in favor of avoiding these fake meat programs. And one example that I think is particularly dangerous, my opinion, is Impossible Burger. Impossible Burger not only has genetically engineered soy sprayed with Roundup. You can calculate how much Roundup is there by sending it to a lab, and it's high. The red color that makes it look like fake blood and meat comes from genetically engineered yeast, where they put in genes from the roots of soy. Now, we don't eat soy roots, so this has never been in the food supply. And when they asked the FDA, can you give us generally recognized as safe status, the FDA scientists under the Obama administration said, no way. This has never been in the human food supply. And by the way, when you scoop this up from your fermentation vats, this leg hemoglobin that's red colored, you end up with 30% of that scoop are other stuff that you don't purify out that has 46 other uncharacterized proteins, also not part of the food supply. So no, we're not giving you any letter. But because Monsanto was in charge of policy at the FDA over GMOs, the Impossible Burger company said, all right, we'll put it on the market anyway. We don't need GRAS status. But under the Trump administration, with no additional data, the FDA reversed its position and said, we'll call it GRAS, generally recognized as safe. Now, we know that many people that have eaten the Impossible Burger have reported problems, sickness, or symptoms. We've heard that from other nonprofits that haven't yet published their results, so it's hard to point to that. But I wouldn't test it. I wouldn't test my body on this genetically engineered situation. Now, I mentioned that you genetically engineer yeast with genes from soy to produce the protein that's normally created in the root. That's called synthetic biology. And that's not something that's just new. It was used in the 80s to create L-tryptophan, the supplement that we talked about earlier, and that had some problems. It caused the death of about 100 Americans, and 5,000 to 10,000 fell sick from the genetically engineered version of the bacteria used to create the L-tryptophan. And we think it was the GMO that caused the problem. But that's now being used to create proteins and enzymes and medicines and supplements. And they're genetically engineering yeast or algae or bacteria and then fermenting it and then supposedly purifying and isolating the byproduct. But what do they do with their yeast and bacteria and algae? What if it escapes? What if it's not killed completely? That's another source of genetically modified microorganisms that we may end up in our gut. So the ones that are producing opioids or CBD or medicines may be in our gut, producing it 24/7, or industrial enzymes. Or the two companies we know about, because they're bragging about it, have genetically engineered soil microbes in up to 43 million acres and up to 5 trillion microbes per acre. What happens when that gets into the gut bacteria? And that industry is about to explode. So we are in an urgent situation, Eric, to stop the release of genetically engineered microbes while we still have a rather young industry with less power. And we are just coming off a pandemic when we realize that microbes can travel, mutate, and wreak havoc. And we have a growing ban gain of function movement that have the right idea as a start. They just don't understand the biology, that it's not just potential pandemic pathogens that need to be banned from gain of function, but any microbe, common everyday microorganisms, cannot be released if we're to maintain nature as it has been inherited by us to give to future generations. So we think the good news is, I think everyone just got it. It doesn't take long to go, oh my God, that's so important. That's one of the greatest assets. And we have all these different groups that rely on a healthy microbiome for their success. They just need to hear this. So please share this recording with other people. Send them to Responsible Technology. Share the 16-minute video. Don't let the genie out of the bottle, because we need a critical mass. And it turns out that ends up changing human history. Somehow consciousness doesn't act in a linear, local fashion. We do tend to shift as a system. And it takes a critical number of people getting it. So don't just look at it lightly. Be one of those critical numbers. Understand this. Even just understanding and appreciating and realizing we need to protect nature now. We need to protect nature immediately, change our relationship with nature now that we have the ability to damage all living beings and all future generations. That shift in relationship is what we intend to create globally as the antidote to this new dangerous technology.
Protect nature now. That says it all. Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, again, visit right after this is over, right after you finish listening to this, responsibletechnology.org. In fact, just go on right now, load that on the website. Again, this is really important. I mean, this is one of the most important, if not the most important interview I've done. Again, I can't thank you enough. And any other websites or any other resources, or is that really the main one, responsibletechnology.org?
Um, I would say secretingredientsfilm.com is a film that shows how switching to organic can change your health dramatically. It's the most effective tool to convince people to eat organic. So it's not just for those that are already eating or that are wanting to switch to organic and wanting to know why. It's for those who are the food fanatics who people run away from because you've been talking about food for so long. Just don't try it anymore. Let me do it. Show them the film that I did with Amy Hart. It has, spouses say to me, I tried for years to get my husband to change. Now he's more fanatic than I was because he saw Secret Ingredients. And so it's a very powerful film, secretingredientsfilm.com. And then we have, and IRT has Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all that. So the mothership is responsibletechnology.org.
Okay. I'll make sure to put the links in the show notes. And again, Jeffrey, thank you so much. It was an honor speaking with you. You shared so much valuable information. And yeah, just definitely take action while you can. Responsibletechnology.org.
Thank you, Eric. Safe eating.